Hi, this is Tamara from mooglyblog.com, and in this video, I'm going to be demonstrating how to crochet part 3 of the Spring Cellar sweater. We've already gone over parts 1 and 2, which you'll find here on the Moogly Blog YouTube channel, and the written patterns you'll find on mooglyblog.com. As before, I'm using a USI 5.5 millimeter crochet hook and Bernat Softee Cotton. Let's go ahead and dive into part 3. Our first step is to sew the back and front of our sweater together. So here you can see I've got two pieces. Here's the front piece with our V, and here's the back piece without the V. Now, up to this point, right side and wrong side really doesn't matter. And ultimately, it still doesn't matter unless you're looking very closely. But you can look at your two pieces and see which direction you crocheted them in. So I can tell by looking at it that I crocheted the bottom edge, looking at it from this side, and the bottom row of this one from this side. So what I want to do is put two of the same sides together. So I'm going to flip my back piece over. Now, if you cannot tell which way you crocheted it, it's not going to matter. The main thing is really to make sure that you've got the bottoms and the tops together when it comes time to do our seaming. So we can do this in any order you like. You can do the sides first, then the shoulders, then the sides. Doesn't really matter, but we want to match up our edges. You can see how the body portion of the front and the back have the same number of rows. This is where we can bring in our stitch markers. You can see I've got all different brands and everything all mixed together here. It doesn't matter which kind you like to use. What we're going to do is use our stitch markers to match up our rows. So I'm just going to hold this top edge together and put a stitch marker through it. And then I'll do the same thing at the bottom. And if you don't want to use stitch markers, you can use clips. They make, all sorts of different tools specifically for this sort of thing. I figure most people have stitch markers. If they don't, I recommend it. You should. And then what I like to do is just kind of go every few rows. You can kind of see how they match up here and find another spot where they match. This isn't required, but as you do your sewing, this will help make sure that you don't get off track. When you're sewing those seams, before you know it, it's really easy to get off track. So this will just help me keep everything nice and lined up. So after I have those together, then I want to do the same thing here on the other side. It's a little harder to see now. You can kind of see we've got the same thing, of course, for the side seam. So I would do the same thing with my stitch markers there. Then, once we've got our two side seams matched up, we want to do that at the shoulders as well. And if you've got all your stitch counts correct, let me get our ends out of the way here, get ourselves centered. You should have the same number of stitches to match up on each side. That little shoulder that came up here and then our shoulder rows there should match up perfectly. And again, you can use your stitch markers to match those up at the ends and then maybe another one in the middle here. These are sort of short seams. But after you've got those all matched up, then you can take the ends of your yarn if you've left long ends, or you can take the leftover bit of yarn from your last skein or even the first one and simply sew those together using your favorite method. Now, let's talk about what those methods might be. So now let's sew up this shoulder seam together. Again, this is exactly how I'm going to do the rest. We're just going to demo on this shoulder. So you can see here on one of the sides, I've left a longer tail, so I'm going to go ahead and use that to do my sewing. If you haven't left a long tail, you can just cut a new length of yarn and use that to do your sewing. Just make sure when you pull the first end through, you don't pull it all the way through. Leave about 4 inches on both ends so you can weave them in just like you do the rest of your ends. Now, let's go ahead and start sewing. You can see my yarn is attached to this side, and I want to work back and forth in the mattress stitch in my pairs of stitches. So what I'm going to do first is go from behind under the top 2 loops of the stitch on the opposite piece. That first stitch along that edge. And then I pull my yarn all the way through. Then I'm going to come right back and go under the top 2 loops of that last stitch of this row. Let me make sure I'm getting that last stitch here. Right there. All right. It's okay if you need to turn around, take a moment. Make sure you're going in the right spot. I came from behind on that one as well. You can see that now pulls those two sides together. Now we just want to go back and forth. We go from behind under those 2 loops on the other side, and then we go back to this side. Come from behind under those top 2 loops. This is called mattress stitch seaming, and as you pull that thread, the seam itself should mostly disappear. Now, if you do not like mattress stitch seaming, then you can absolutely use a different seaming method if you prefer. You could use whip stitch, you could use a crocheted seam. Some people like to crochet their seams, whatever you like to do. I do recommend, however, that you give it a nice firm seam. This shoulder seam, and indeed the entire neckline, are really important for the structure of our garment. I know a lot of us, myself included, enjoy garments that are and projects that are seamless, right? We like things that fewer seams, less sewing. But sewing our crochet and knitted garments really can provide a lot of structure to the piece. It can be more than just something you have to do to put it together. It can really affect the way the sweater hangs. And for this sweater, we want a nice solid seam, not anything too overly stretchy at our shoulders. The sides, it's less important, but really everything's going to hang from the shoulder, and we want that to be a nice, sturdy, solid seam. So let these stitches be too loose. Make sure they're nice and tight as you go. You can see I'm just going back and forth, coming from behind under those top 2 loops all the way across. And as I say, when it comes to finishing it off, I'll just weave in these ends like I do all the rest of the ends for my project. All right, so now we have finished our seaming. I have sewn together each of our shoulders and each of our side seams. You'll note I only sewed from the hem up to where we notched in for our armpits. We're going to have our arms go attached right here. We're going to work around right here for the neckline, and we're going to work right around here for the hem. And the hem is where we start next. So now I've turned my sweater around. You can see up here are the armholes and the neck hole. So we're down here at the hem, and I have found one of the side seams that I've sewn. If you're right-handed, you'll probably want to start at the right side seam. If you're left-handed, you'll probably want to start at the left side seam. The most important thing is to find it and then find the very next stitch after it. That's where we want to join to begin crocheting around to add our hem. So I've inserted my hook in that next stitch after the seam. Now, if you're off by 1 or 2, it doesn't really matter. It's just a good place to start. We're going to go all the way around. So don't spend too much time finding exactly where it is. It's just a good starting point. Then we're going to take our yarn. We can go ahead and join with a slip stitch. There we go. And we can go ahead and make this a nice tight slip stitch, not one that we want to work back into, like so. We can just weave in that end when we're all done and ready to weave in the rest of our ends. Now, for our setup row, we're going to start by chaining 9. 1, 2, 3, and these are going to be chains that we're going to work back into, so don't make these super tight. I believe this is 6, 7, 8, and 9. Okay, so now we've got a chain of 9. Now what we're going to do is skip the chain closest to the hook. That's going to act as our turning chain. In the next chain, we're going to work a single crochet going under the top 2 loops. Now, if you've made other of my patterns, you'll know that usually when I talk about working into the chain, I prefer to work into the underneath hump. This pattern is a little different. We're going to be establishing some ribbing. So for this first stitch, go under the top 2 loops for your single crochet. There we go. And if you'd like, you can go ahead and put a stitch marker right in this first stitch. There we go. Then, in the remaining 7 chains, I should say, we're going to work back loop only single crochets. So this means we're going to look at the top 2 loops of the chain, find those top 2 loops, there we are, and work under the back loop only. There we go. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. There we go. Now that remaining little chain down there is the one that joined us, so we can pull down on our tail to tighten that up. There we go. So now to finish up this row, what we want to do is slip stitch 2 together in the next 2 unworked stitches at the waist. What does that mean? We're going to come back down here and look at our waistband, our hem, if you will. You can see right there, that is the stitch we joined to. So we're going to go into the next stitch and pull up a loop, and into the next stitch after that and pull up a loop, and pull this loop through both of those other 2 loops, just like so. Then we have finished row 1 of our hem. To begin row 2, we're going to go ahead and, of course, turn our work. We're going to be turning back and forth, working in rows as we work our way around the hem. So half our rows will be working sort of, it seems like, from the inside of the sweater. But we're ignoring the rest of the sweater except for these stitches that we connect to. So now as we work our way back away from the sweater for row 2, we're going to skip that slip stitch 2 together, that last stitch right there. We're also not going to chain 1 to begin this row. We're going to go straight into working a back loop only single crochet in that next stitch. So remember, we've got our loop here. We skip the slip stitch 2 together. We go right to that next stitch. And again, back loop only single crochet. Remember, back loop only is always relative to us, the crocheter. It's the loop furthest away of those top 2 of that top V there. So we're just going to back loop only, single crochet across until we get to that very last stitch. Oops, there we go. That one didn't want to cooperate. You just take your time, work your way across here with those single crochets. We're almost there. And one more after this. There we go. So now we've got just that very last stitch remaining, and we want to put a single crochet right in the top of that very last stitch. That's where having that stitch marker can come in really handy. And that's what it should look like at the end of row 2. For row 3, let me go ahead and move that stitch marker out of the way, and we turn our work again. Each one of these little hem rows is only going to have 8 stitches total. So now, when we work our row here, our row 3 repeats, we're going to be repeating rows 2 and 3 around. We're working back towards the sweater. So we need to remember when we work back towards the sweater, we do want to chain 1. Then we're going to work that first single crochet under those top 2 loops. This is going to give us a much nicer, firmer edge. So I'll put my my stitch marker in the top of that single crochet. There we go. And now we can go right back to our back loop only single crochet. Look for that top V and make sure you put your hook under just that back loop. Go ahead and split the top of that stitch essentially in half there. So we're going to do that again 7 times total here, 7 of those back loop only single crochets. And that will get us all the way back down, oops, to where we skipped that slip stitch 2 together. So just a couple more stitches here. And you can see how that last one there can be difficult to grab. Sometimes it likes to hide sort of right there. You can double check your count and make sure 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We need one more stitch. So we're going to go right in there, right in that spot, and grab that back loop only. Sometimes it can be a little tricky. Sometimes if you have a sharper hook, that can be helpful. But if you just push through in that spot, you should be able to grab that loop and make that final back loop only single crochet. Now we need to do that slip stitch 2 together again. We want to look at our work. We can see right there is the last stitch that we were attached to. So here are those next 2. We're going to go to the next stitch, pull up a loop, go to the next stitch, pull up a loop, and pull that loop all the way through the other 2 loops. And don't be afraid to make that slip stitch 2 together nice and tight. We're not going to work back into it. That's how to work rows 2 and 3, and that's our repeat all the way around the hem. So let's do row 2 and row 3 one more time together. We're going to turn, put a little bit more yarn here from my skein, skip that slip stitch 2 together, go to the next stitch and back loop only, single crochet until we get to the last stitch. Okay, so here we are. We've got our stitch marker. We're in our last stitch, so we're going to work a regular single crochet under both of those loops. Then we can move our stitch marker, turn our work, turn the whole sweater around, whatever is comfortable for you. Get our hook back in there now. And now I'm going to remember to chain 1 because now I'm heading back towards the sweater. Single crochet under both of those top 2 loops. And I can replace the stitch marker, which is another good way to help you remember. At the stitch marker end, you'll need to chain 1, but not at the other end. And now we go back to that back loop only single crochet. So there's 1, 2, 3, a little bit more yarn there, 4, 5, 6, and then remember that last one likes to hide right there. Get that loop. There we go. And that's 7. And now we can see, and we look at our work. That's the last one we attached to, so we want the next 2. Go to the next stitch, pull up a loop, the stitch after that, pull up a loop, and pull that loop right on through the other 2. Continue repeating those 2 rows all the way around for your hem. All right, as you can see here, I have gone all the way around the hem of my sweater, and I have finished on a row 2 repeat. That's one of the rows where we're heading away from the sweater, and we end up here at the end. You can see I've used up all my stitches at the bottom. Now, you should end up using up just kind of all your stitches when we do that last row out, but if for some reason you find that you have lost your way and you've missed a stitch somewhere or maybe added a stitch somewhere attached to the wrong one, if you can't see where it is, you can definitely fudge this a little bit in that last slip stitch 2 together and go into that next row if you absolutely need to, or add in an extra slip stitch 2 together. I want you to have success with your sweater, and if you're going for the county fair maybe, or a state fair or something like that, maybe you need your perfect stitches, but if you can't see where it is, feel free to fudge it just a little bit here at the end because we've done a lot of stitching all the way around that hem. Hopefully you'll end up right here where I did. So now it's time to cut our yarn and sew the last row of our hem to the first row of our hem. So I'm going to make sure to cut a little bit of an extra long tail here. This isn't very long. It should be about 2.5 inches wide here for our hem. So I'll only cut about, 16 inches or so. I'm not going to measure it. It'll be plenty to sew it together. Now, before I put that on my needle, of course, I need to finish off this row. So you can either just pull up on that loop or you can pull your end through that loop to secure it, however you like to do it. Then finally, we bring out our yarn needle and we put our end right on that needle. Okay, so we could just whip stitch these 2 rows together, but let's think a little bit about how the rest of our rows were constructed. Normally, when we'd work back into this row, if we were crocheting into it, we'd be working in that back loop only. This row, of course, would have normally been the row working into this row, and the whole bottom would have been included in that. So we can use this knowledge to make our finishing little seam here just a little extra nice. To do that, I'm going to start by going under just the back loop only of the last stitch of this last row. And then at the same time, just to make it easy for myself, I'm going to make sure I find the bottom of the 8th stitch out here, and I can use the bottom of the row here a little bit to help me count that out. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. There we go. So now I want to catch the loops at the bottom of that stitch right there. Like so. I'm just going to go ahead and catch those in there. Now, officially, we worked these into just that back loop. But we can go ahead and grab whatever's left here on the bottom. So we're just going to pull that right through, and then we come to the next stitch in. Back loop only on this one. Get to the loops at the bottom of the next one on the other side. You don't have to pull it super tight right away. It's a short seam. We can pull it tight later. I'm trying to make it easy for you guys to see here. Back loop only of this next stitch on this side. Come over here. Find the 2 loops at the bottom of the stitch directly across. There we are. Just going to take our time and work through these 8 stitches. Back loop of this one. Bottom loops at the bottom of that one. Don't overthink it. Unless somebody gets super close to your hem, and I'm talking bends over and takes a close look, they're not going to see exactly how you did it anyway. We just want to make it look as seamless as possible. So, take our time here, find that next stitch, come up to the stitch across, and pull closed. You can see we're almost here at the end. In fact, I think we are officially at the end, like so. But if we look, we can see there's still just a little bit of a gap right there that we wouldn't have gotten if we'd just been stitching around. So let's take an extra stitch. Why not? We've got all this tail end. Let's put it to work. And grab those pieces right there. And let's see, does that look? Does that fade away? Does that make it look like the rest of the ribbing? I think so. I think that's pretty good. So now I can just take this tail end, send it to the inside of my sweater, and weave it in just like all the rest of my ends. So after we have finished our beautiful ribbed hem, it's time to move on to our neckline ribbing. Now, this is the sweater all sewn together. I've slipped a piece of paper in between the front and the back, so it's a little easier for you to see what I'm doing. This is for the video. You don't have to put paper in yours. This is just to make it easier to see. So what we're going to do is we're going to be joining our yarn a little bit up this side and then crocheting this way. It's just like the ribbing we were doing before at the hem, but we've got a row to join to now. We don't have to chain off and sort of do it in the air to go around. Let me show you what I mean. So I've got the end of my yarn here, and we want to take a moment and look at our sweater. We're going to join in the 4th row. So we want to count upwards from our V, right? Here's where we start. 1, 2, 3, 4. So that is the 4th row up from that V. You can kind of see it in our sets of 2. 1, 2, 3, 4. So this is that stitch right along the edge of that row. If you'd like, if you need to sort of look back and forth between your instructions and stuff like that, it can be a really good place to go ahead and put a stitch marker right there at the top of that row. So now what we want to do is join with our single crochet right in the side of that row. So you can choose to split the stitches. Let me talk about what that means here as an example. You can go in the middle of the stitch like this, or you can go all the way around the stitch like this, sort of into that space. For a garment like this, typically I prefer to split the stitch. So to join with a single crochet, what I'm going to do is put a twist in the yarn and drop it right on my hook like so. Then I'm going to come back right there to that marked section, and you see how the double crochet here, it kind of almost has 2 sections. There's the top where we pulled through those last 2 loops, and the bottom where we pulled through those first 2 loops. And I'm going to use that to my advantage. I'm going to make sure I come into that top section and split the stitch, insert my hook, pull up a loop, and finish my single crochet. Now, if you'd prefer, you can join with a slip stitch, chain 1, and then single crochet in that same spot. It's whatever you prefer. Now that that's there, I'm going to use that stitch marker again. You can use a new one if you prefer. I'm just going to mark the top of that first stitch. There we go. Get my hook back in there. And now what I want to do is single crochet again in the side of that same row. So now I'm going to use the bottom half of that stitch. Sort of just put my hook right through there. I want to try, when I can, to get 2 loops on top of my hook when I do that. It gives me a really nice, firm attachment to that stitch. There we go. So now we've worked 2 stitches in the side of that row. So now we want to do the same thing, work 2 stitches in the side of each of these next 3 rows. That will bring us right back down to the bottom of our V there where it meets. So let's do that now. I'm going to go in the top half of this stitch. And sometimes if it's a chainless starting double crochet or a stacked single crochet, if it's a different kind of stitch, it might be a little trickier to split the stitch, but just do your best. Like you can go into where the stitch in the row above is going into that stitch. That can be a good place to put your hook if you're having trouble finding where to put it. So there's 2 stitches in the side of that row. We go down to the next row. 1 stitch in the top half, all single crochets. Put a 2nd stitch in the bottom half. Again, just kind of stick your hook, find where it wants to go through the stitch. There we go. And then you can see, let me get that centered again. We've got 1 more row right here. And we want to put 2 stitches right in the side of this row. So there's 1 and 2. Now you'll note that by working 2 stitches in the side of each of these 4 rows here, we now have 8 single crochets. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So, similar number that we had, right? Same number of stitches we had in our bottom hem. So now what we're going to do is we're going to start using this row as sort of the bottom of that hem. And again, we want to count sort of each of these stitches along the side. We want to make sure to work 2 stitches in there. Think of it as if each one of these double crochets along the side here is 2 stitches for us to work into. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to work my slip stitch 2 together, working just into the side of this first row. So I'm going to go into the bottom half and pull up my loop. Take your time with it if you get caught on some of those strings there. Then I'm going to go into the top half of that same stitch and pull up my loop, and then pull that loop on through the other 2 loops, like so. Now, from here, I'm going to continue working just as we did down on the hem. Let me pull that paper out of the way because it's going to make turning the work kind of crazy. But let's do it together. Let's turn our work right now. So it's going to look almost like you're working from the inside of the sweater, again, just like we did on the hem. So for our row 2, repeat here. Again, just like we were doing on the hem. Let me clear some space so we can see it nice and clearly here. We're going to skip that slip stitch 2 together. We know that's that last stitch we just made. Go right to the next stitch and find that back loop only. There we go. And make our single crochet there. So there's 1, 2, keep working in that back loop only all the way across with single crochets until we get to the last stitch. 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Now you can see we've come to that last marked stitch. Love having that stitch marker there. We work a regular single crochet in that last one, going under both of those top 2 loops, like so. And now you can see we're all set up to keep going. Let's work the next row together, row 3. We're going to chain 1 and then turn, or turn and chain 1, however you prefer to do it. There we go. Now we're kind of back on the outside of the sweater, if you will. And we're on the edge away from the sweater, so that's got our chain 1 and single crochet in the first stitch. So we'll mark that stitch again. There we go. And then we're back to working in the back loop only. We need 7 more. We always want to keep those 8 stitches across. So this is the 2nd stitch of the row, 3rd, 4th, 5th. Oop. I have to do that 5th one again. My yarn got tight. Need to pull up a little bit more from my skein. There we go. So I believe this was number 5. Oop. Got too many loops. Take your time. Get just that back loop. 6, 7. And then just like the hem, that 8th one likes to hide right down there. We'll get that 8th one. And again, we can double check. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We've got our 8 stitches across. So now we know it's time to slip stitch 2 together. And with this one, again, because we're working across our neckline, we don't look for the next 2 stitches. We look for the side of the next row. We can see we already worked in the side of this row. So this is the next row here that we can work into the side of. So we find the bottom half of that stitch, however your hook likes to get in there. There we go, and pull up a loop. And then the top half of that stitch, and pull up a loop, and pull that loop on through. And we're all set to keep going back and forth. Let me get that centered again. There we go. So now we're all set to keep going back and forth, repeating rows 2 and 3. Every time you come down, back down to the neckline, treat the side of that row as the 2 stitches that you slip stitch 2 together in. With this, you'll be able to go all the way around. When we get back here to the back of the neck, of course, we'll actually have pairs of stitches to work into, which makes it even easier. And keep going all the way around. And as we approach that V again, I'll meet you and we'll finish it up together. Okay, so here I have worked pretty much all the way around the neckline. You can see right here, let me get this end out of the way a little bit. Right here is where we attached back and forth and then worked back and forth in rows. And I worked all the way around the neckline until we ended up right back here. Now, let's take a closer look at where we end up. You can see right here, I have attached with my slip stitch 2 together in the side of this last unworked row right here, and worked my row 2 repeat, working out away from the collar or away from the sweater. So now, what do we do, right? We have a couple of options. We could sew these 2 together right there, but I prefer a slightly different look. We don't have any more stitches here along the side for us to anchor to, so instead, we're just going to crochet back and forth in rows without the slip stitch 2 together until we have enough stitches, or enough rows, I should say, to slip behind this area and sew it down right to the inside of the other side of this collar. Might sound like a lot, but don't worry, we're going to do it together. So let's turn this around here so we can get the direction we actually crochet in. And then I've had my last stitch here held open with my stitch marker. Always a good idea if you're going to put something down and walk away from it for more than a couple seconds. Put my loop back on my hook. And now we can just start crocheting in those rows. So if you're following along with the written instructions, which I hope you are, this is the section that starts with the saying next 8 rows. What we're going to do is, of course, this first stitch is just basically a row 3 repeat. And in fact, that's basically what all the rows are going to be across, but we're going to need to finish off without attaching. And of course, we'll want to chain 1 at each end. So we've got our single crochet under the top 2 loops there for our first stitch. Then we are going to back loop only in single crochet in the next 6 stitches. Remember, we've got 8 total. So if we've worked on the first one, back loop only single crochet in the next 6. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4. My yarn got a little tangled around my project. There we go. 5 and 6. This should leave us one more stitch right down here that we can work into. And in this one, we want to go ahead and just do a single crochet under those top 2 loops. Now, because this is the first one, you might not be able to get under both of those loops, and it doesn't really matter. It's going to get hid behind the other tab. So just do your best to get under both of those loops if you can. If you can only get under that back loop only, again, that's fine for this row. But we're just going to finish that off with a standard single crochet. We still want to have our 8 stitches across, but now we're not joining to the side of our neckline anymore. So let's sort of move that out of the way here so we can have an even better view. And that's the first row of our next 8 rows. So that's row 1. So let's do row 2 together. All these rows are going to be exactly the same. We chain 1 and turn. Single crochet under the top 2 loops of that first stitch. There we go. So we can grab another stitch marker for that if you'd like. Get right there. There we go. And then we are going to back loop only, single crochet in the next 6 stitches. So the middle 6, if you will. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then under both of those loops of the very last stitch. with our stitch marker in it. There we go. So those last 2 rows have been the same. Single crochet, back loop only, single crochet to the last one, single crochet in the last one. So we're going to keep doing that. I've done 2 rows like that. Let's do 6 more, and I'll see you when we've got that little tab made. Okay, so now I have crocheted 8 more rows, just working back and forth in our ribbing pattern. This is the sort of little tab, that's what I'm calling it, that we're going to slip behind the other side of our collar and then sew down. This gives us that really lovely overlapped look at our collar. So, how do we do that? We've got our tab made. Now what we want to do is go ahead and cut our end, but let's leave a long tail for sewing it on. If we forget and you cut it off just enough to weave it in, it's okay. You can cut a separate piece of yarn, but I always like to just make it a little bit easier and only have the one end to weave in. So I'm going to cut myself a nice generous tail right there. And then, of course, I need to finish off that last stitch. So you can do that just by pulling up on the loop if you prefer, or you can send your tail end through that last stitch, like so. And then I'm going to go ahead and put that tail end on my yarn needle. You can see I've added my purple piece of paper here, hopefully to make it a little bit easier to see here what I'm doing so it doesn't get lost in the layers. So my sweater right now is right side out. I have crocheted those last 8 rows. I'm going to slip them behind here and sew them down. So to do that, we need to turn this wrong side out. Okay, so I've tried to lay out the sweater as best I can here. It's still officially right side out, but we're looking at the wrong side or the inside of the collar right here. So I have the tail end here attached to my tab, and I've got a few ends here that I haven't woven in yet. It would probably be a good idea to go ahead and weave those in before you sew on your tab. But for the sake of time today, I'm going to move forward. Now you can see I'm sort of straightening out my fabric down here. I want to get a really good look at it. And what I'm looking for is what I can see right here, where that ribbing is right here in this corner, if you will. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take our little tab here and move. You can see here's the end where my yarn is attached. The other corner, I want to move that to the bottom corner of our collar right there. So I've got a stitch marker already in that stitch, so I can just take it and attach it right there. If I can get it to grab. Let's try that again. There we go. So now that's held in the right place. This end, I want to bring it down straight. I want this to be sewn right along. You can see that's where the sweater joins the ribbed neckline, if you will. We want to match up that line right there. So I know that I joined on this side 4 rows up. So I can use that as a guide on this side as well. And look at it closely and say, okay, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4. That's where that side should lay as well. If that confuses you, just do your best to lay it flat. Lay it right along that edge. And now what we're going to do, we can use stitch markers to hold this in place. You can just kind of hold it with your hands if you're comfortable. We want to take our yarn needle and start sewing this in. And I'm going to sew it really carefully, trying to sort of keep my yarn needle on this side of the fabric, which is, we're inside the sweater right now, so that it doesn't show on the outside the same way I would when I'm weaving in my ends. Now, I'm using all the same color of yarn, so even if it does peek through, it's not the end of the world. But I just want to take my time and get through sort of each of these stitches and also pull up little loops here from the wrong side at the edge. Not looking for any particular stitch, just finding what presents itself right here, sort of opposite the stitch at the end of the tab. And basically I'm whip stitching this tab right down here. Sewing is often sort of dreaded by many crocheters, especially when you're first learning. It can seem really intimidating. But really the key is to take your time and remember that just like your crochet stitches that you take with your hook, until you've woven in your ends, you can usually pull them back out. You can take your time and pick out your stitches with your needle if you feel like you've taken a wrong turn. But using stitch markers to help hold those stitches in place can also be a really big help. So don't be afraid to use your stitch markers in lots of ways to hold your work together to make it easier to do your sewing. So you can see here, I'm really just taking my time. I think I've only sewn down 5 of the stitches so far. I just really want to make sure I get a good, sort of go through a couple good loops here along the sweater, and then grab the bottom of that next stitch. Pull that end out of the way here. As I work my way back towards where my stitch marker is, I can take that out and double check and make sure that we're all lined up here right in that corner. You can see where the fabric changes, and that's where I want that corner to be. So I'm going to continue to work my way down and sew down that last stitch right there. Now, I'm not going to stop there. I don't want to leave this open. I think that will lay a little funny. It might give it a little extra play, but I don't want, we all have different chest sizes. We all lean over occasionally and do different things. I want to go ahead and sew this down. We'll just leave it at that. So let's make ourselves a little bit more room here on the inside of our sweater. And now I'm going to continue to sew down this line right here, just where it's open. And you can see right where we had attached that row when we started crocheting from that edge, and that's where we want to sew this one down. So same thing. Nothing fancy here to turning the corner. We just work up the other side. Oop. Want to make sure we've cut a long enough tail there. If it comes off the needle, no big deal. We'll just put that right back on. There we go. And then we're back to sewing. So again, just take your time. If you feel like you need to put down some stitch markers to help you hold these things together, that's fine. Otherwise, you can just sort of eyeball it here. This part especially is going to be completely on the inside of the sweater. So don't stress it too much. No one's going to see this part unless you show them the inside of your sweater. And if you're showing them the inside of your sweater, that's the last thing they should be complaining about. So we're almost there. Oop, there we go. You can just stick your finger in there and see. Let's get ourselves centered again. Got just a few more stitches. And we just want to make sure it lays nicely. Now I'm not going to sew this down on here. I'm going to let that just lay on top. So we've got just a few more stitches to take here. And I'm doing this right here with you in real time. So you can see just how relatively quick and easy it is, even when you're taking your time with it. There we go. I think that does it. Oh, nope. We've got one more row. I misjudged. No problem. Let's do a couple more stitches here. A couple more than I thought. There's a good spot. And then right up here. I just want to catch right at the top. There we go. Can I put my finger in through there? Not anymore. So now I will go ahead and weave that in, but before I do that, we'll turn it right side out and double check and make sure everything's exactly where we want it before we do weave in that end. So let me get that sort of straightened out here again. And if I bring back up our purple paper, we'll be able to get a really good look at that collar. There we go. So there's our end waiting to be woven in. But you can see now we have this beautiful overlap right here. We've just crocheted back and forth to make that tab so we could slip it behind and sew it down to create our beautiful V-neck. And with that, we finished part 3. And that's how to crochet part 3 of the Spring Cellar sweater. I hope you're enjoying this fast and easy crochet pullover pattern. Thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe.